use of cash has really come up, mentioned in the banking sector and in the immovable property sector. In fact, in the immovable property sector, there is a reference to the use of cash restriction regulations, which helped mitigate the risk of cash deriving from illicit proceeds from being used to purchase property. But the NRA itself says that, however, these regulations do not extend to the use of cash in construction, renovation, finishings, which is a very important aspect of the immovable property sector, because it's not just buying and selling, but it's the actual business of building and everything. So that is one aspect where they mentioned a vulnerability, sort of, and also the fact that cash can be used to lease out property, especially where monthly rent amounts to less than 10,000. This is not captured by the PML FTR. So again, maybe here we have a lack of controls. I don't know from your end how you see.
Putting the three questions in one question. Let's start by cash in itself. I think we need to understand Malta, right? Culturally, how cash was always used. A cash-intensive society, I believe, right? If we have to compare our jurisdiction with other jurisdictions.
Statistically, among the highest in the EU, right, for sure.
So even I would say for the
day to decline, basically.
Agreed. Even on a day-to-day basis, we're a cash-intensive society, right? Potential are improving, demographics are changing, culture is changing. So, but cash is here to stay, right? And even I think even AMLA was speaking on cash, that a cash is a basic right to individuals. So we're not going away from cash. However, we need to also understand that cash potentially is one of the highest risk when it comes to understanding source of funds or the commingling of funds between the right cash, to put it that way, and illegal activities, illicit activities that potentially are being paid in cash, right? So this is where we need to start with. Strategically, banks are moving away, right, from the conventional cash activities that they used to offer, we used to offer in previous years. Even technological is helping in this, right? Was reading some articles yesterday. We are continuing increasing our ATMs around the island, increasing the fleet, making them more technological. That potentially is an opportunity for cash, right? It goes without saying. However, more important than that, and I think the NRA highlight this too, it's about controls. It's about what controls banks have around cash. And maybe, and it is I think understandable, that people depositing cash may want to use ATM, because up to this age, ATM does not speak as yet. So they're not asking you from where this cash was brought. However, we are all sure, and I think we're not hiding any secret, that behind an ATM there is an array of controls that one is depositing cash with. So this is to start with. Controls vis-a-vis cash. Secondly, you highlighted the legal notice, I believe it's 81 of 2021 when it comes to cash, which is highlighting some sectors to be wary of in order to be able not to exceed the 10K of such activities per transaction. And even that should have, banks should have controls for that type of customers, hence the need of KYC, so that they update it, not to have transactions exceeding that. However, nowadays, 3 years have passed from that legal notice with the upcoming AMLD, AMLR, that will be exceeded actually to all sectors, not just to those limits. And this is where then you highlighted construction, property, right? That going forward in the coming months, coming year, that 10K or potentially lower, because 10K is the maximum amount it is allowable, jurisdiction can have lower amount, and we know that even in EU there are countries with 5,000, 3,000, 1,000, right? So they are moving away from cash, that it will be, I think, another challenging expectation to society, because now it's fine to pay more than 10K for a service which is not mentioned in the legal notice, and it's only natural, right? You are having that, fine, but it is fine. However, this is where now we are leading. So cash, keep on the necessary controls around it. necessary controls around, as we speak, those services that are being highlighted, and moving forward, more controls, because we know that non-face-to-face, even you, Manfred, mentioned earlier, the non-face-to-face services are of a higher risk. So transaction monitoring where comes into place. The last point, and I stop on this, is you mentioned lease. I think this needs to have some broader context on this. I don't know if Mark agrees with me or not on this, but when it comes cash versus lease, it needs to have, you need two to tango, right? You need the other part to be able to contribute to that financial crime. Because if I'm paying a lease in cash, the other party, if I'm doing financial crime, it needs to give me some part back of the cash, right? Because if I'm leasing someone, potentially I'm not living here, but I am paying it in cash, then as a financial crime, maybe tax evasion, fine. But in itself, I need to understand it a bit more.
This could be a fictitious lease, but somebody comes to the bank and deposits 9,000 euros and says this is lease, but it doesn't fall within the restriction, right?
Definitely, but even that, as long as, because nowadays with leasing, there is governance around it. You need to register the place, you need to have tax, so it is much more, I would say, transparent, or it should be, let's say, it should be much more transparent as it should be before. So in that case, it is making it more difficult, unless we ask for supporting documentation and we see a fictitious address, or you go into a particular address and you say, how come there is so much people living, or how come this address is being seen in a number of other leases. But I don't think, Mark, that this is quite on a high or on a regular basis, that we are seeing certain leases which are being, at least from my perspective, right? So, and yet again, the NRA highlight a much more broader picture, which potentially, even going back to what Mark said, we are reporting something which we never thought is from a lease, and from investigation it transpired that was coming from a lease. So this is where
the
we need to find
threshold is
the balance.
high as well, this 10,000 threshold.
I think what the cash restriction did, and this was welcomed by, I believe, all the subject persons, because now it's imposed that you can't buy certain assets via cash. What it did was that it's become more difficult to launder a large amount of cash at one go, okay, which was happening in the past. But with this, I think now it is becoming very difficult. So buying a property for 1 million in cash, today you can't do it. Up till a few years ago, you could do it.
Yeah, but the lease threshold, you become a subject person only if you accept above 10,000 monthly rent. I mean, that threshold,
I don't believe there's a lot of properties fine,
but
not the
exactly.
majority of properties.
So you're not capturing.
14K.
So you're not capturing 95. I'm inventing a figure, but a large portion of the lease transactions
but the
that
amounts,
are
when you
taking place.
consider what they could do before, buying a property in cash for 1 million, and now renting out, the renting out itself, you need to have another person being colluding with you as well.
Exactly. So
you're not like you're having a contract in your hand. I purchased a property, I can show the bank that I purchased this property, now I'm selling it. So I clean that money. So with rental, it's not comparing like with like. Okay, so for me, that's very important. And what is happening today, and what you mentioned, what could happen as well today, is that the cash is used to finish, which is legal. And this is why we have different subject persons. Not only the banks are subject persons, so you have the notary, you have the estate agent, okay, that are also subject persons. And this is where collectively we can fight money laundering, because the bank itself cannot understand whether a particular payment is actually happening. The notary itself.
And at times,
doesn't.
Mark, and I think it's a good point to mention, at times you're not even aware. Because if this, you mentioned it, there's a particular financial crime, how it could happen is you buy a property with a bank loan, so you just don't even pay in cash. And then you put all the requirements in your home, in your house, in cash. we're not privy to their transactions as a bank. So we will never know that they are paying actually in cash because they go to suppliers, pay them in cash.
Exactly. So it's a question of circumvention that is the point, in fact, that Charlie mentioned, right?
To loans, and then the repayments are done in cash, for example.
But there are some banks who accept cash payments for loans as well.
So I think in this area, all the subject persons involved in the property sector, in assets and other assets as well, because now we have cars, you can't buy cars, jewelry, certain assets in cash. So all subject persons together play a very important role, and there are controls that each subject persons will have. Banks, when they provide a repayment for a works being done, ask for VAT receipts, for example.
Part of the loan, right?
So as part of the repayment, the notary can understand sometimes whether at the time of the contract the property is finished or not. Okay, so all subject persons needs to play a role in this, but for me, I think as a country we do need to shift away from this cash intensive jurisdiction, because even in the NRA, I don't know, there are multiple times it states that our economy, there are a lot of cases where cash is used and it never enters the banking system. So I think this is something that needs to be looked at beyond the banks, because I mean it's very evident from the NRA that there's a whole economy that is not even touching the banks or the financial institutions as well. But the cash restrictions for me was a very important step.
And this will be broadened now with the anti-money laundering regulation extending it to services as well and not just goods.
But I believe, I might be wrong, but it's going to get a step backwards, because person to person will not fall under the regulation. So if I'm selling you a property, that could mean, but this is something we need to verify.
Speaking about cash, Ryan mentioned ATMs, I believe, earlier on, and the NRA actually goes into that and lists ATMs and online onboarding as two potential vulnerabilities. It doesn't give them too much prominence, because ultimately the residual risk of that vulnerability, or the residual rating of that vulnerability is still medium, but it mentions it as a vulnerability. So the use of ATMs, because the person depositing is not meeting a cashier, not meeting a bank employee, and also onboarding virtually or through online systems is seen as a higher risk element. I mean, I think with technology as it has evolved today, I'm not sure I agree with the argument, especially when it comes to online onboarding. And my fear is that this statement in the NRA might actually dissuade organizations from moving towards online onboarding, when in actual fact today with biometrics and tampering checks, I mean, the technology has advanced tremendously. I mean, we haven't mentioned AI for a change in today's episode, but obviously the buzzword at the moment. I don't know, ATMs maybe, online onboarding, I'm not too sure.
We are living in an era where, I mean, we're moving away and having more digitalization. The issue with ATMs is that someone can be using somebody else's account by just using the card to deposit money into a third-party account. Okay, but I think it's still important that behind that deposit there are controls in place to understand whether the account where the deposit is received is being operated in line with the expected type of transactions, type of behavior, account activity, etc., etc.
So those are the controls, you're saying? So
what you lose is that you do not have the physical presence to verify that whoever is depositing the cash into the particular account is actually the account holder. It could be an important aspect, especially when there are human trafficking or abuse. But for me, it all boils down of looking at the account and see whether it's being operated in what and how you expect it.
Especially when you have staggered deposits, about the deposits X amount today, X amount tomorrow. The cashier would technically recognize that person and start to raise an eyebrow. If it's through an ATM, you need other mechanisms to be able to detect that.
And that can be replicated, I would say, by a transaction monitoring rule, right? Layering. You know how layering works. So if you keep on few amounts, but in a series of, that could, yes. Touching based on remote onboarding, let's say take the easy way, which I say I will agree with both sides. Definitely your argument does make sense, and so perhaps the NRA, and let me explain maybe a bit of a context. I think I understand where the NRA is coming, because in nature, not meeting someone in person makes it more of a higher risk. And this is, I think, the message that NRA needs to rely on. Even nowadays, considering certain, or one might from a use of laptop being somewhere else, doing certain things. So this is maybe where the NRA is. However, coming to your argument, which I think we have to agree on, technology of today is not the technology of 10 years ago, right? And potentially,
could be better.
Definitely, it's better.
Than a face-to-face photocopy of your passport.
That is why I said potentially controls on non-face-to-face are better than face-to-face. Right?
Biometrics,
which we're not doing biometrics. We're not doing biometrics on a face-to-face. If there's someone with a potential false document, you might not detect it. So nowadays, thanks to technology, I think strategically, I think even the local market, I think strategically we're going there. I think it needs to happen, right? Remote onboarding, I think this needs to happen even for customer experience.
And there are banks who have
there are banks which
direction.
are moving in that direction. We are moving in that direction too. The most important thing, and yet you highlighted it, is to have the required controls, which is making sense to the product being offered. However, even concluding on this, I think nowadays we should be mature enough and confident enough of the technology advancements, you mentioned just AI, which we didn't touch base on, that are there to assist us, right? And at times are making more sense than meeting someone, putting a story in front of your face, which you cannot, or it is also limited to confirm. And technology is confirming that there and then.
So that now that we mentioned that, I think it all boils down as well, adopting a risk-based approach. Because it's one thing onboarding a customer with a basic account. And it's one thing onboarding a customer using more complex products. Okay, why am I mentioning this? Because the same tools that we can use as banks to verify can also be used by the criminals to create. Yes. Okay, we are talking about deep fakes here. You can have a whole conversation with somebody that you think you are conversing with, but it could be just a video that is being... So there is no 100% risk-free method, but it's important for banks, subject persons. Whoever is fighting criminals needs to understand the tools that are available for him or himself, but also for the criminals. So once you understand it and adopt a risk-based approach to put your energy where it matters, and wherever if you can use for low-risk customers, etc., online onboarding, but then you focus more your energy on the higher risk, then yes, I think that's the way forward.
No, and it's a key point, I think, on this particular aspect that we raised. So ultimately, the risks are changing. Exactly. So simply saying online onboarding could be problematic. Yeah, but even face-to-face onboarding could be problematic, because if all I'm doing is collecting a passport copy and the regulator is happy with me collecting a passport copy and a utility bill, then I think we're very limiting in a world where the deepfake situation is posing extreme risk, I would say, to all types of institutions. I think we've explored quite a bit of what the NRA said, I think beyond what we thought we were going to do. Just one final question to wrap up, and we already addressed it. at the very beginning of the conversation, because we said, okay, the NRA will be updated. So this is a document that gives a snapshot of where we are at a particular point in time, right, when the data was collected a couple of years ago. And these are the risks that we're seeing. What would you like to see now in the next NRA? What this possibly exercise might have missed, or maybe it has left us with some questions. What would you like to see now in the next round of analysis by the NCC and the other competent authorities?
A lot of work has been done in this NRA, which is a big improvement from the others, but I think by the time it's published, the data is a bit too old for me. I think in a very dynamic world, when I think, if I'm not mistaken, the data was based on the 2021.
19, 2021, depends.
90, yes, but so it took quite some time, but it could be because also the format has changed, the level of detail has changed.
The methodology has changed, everything has.
If I have to say something and how we can improve this is that even with the data we are providing on a yearly basis, subject persons to the FIAU, which helps the NRA, the ARQ, the Risk Evaluation Questionnaire, I think it would be good as well to have more recent data and to update the NRA.
Yes, I think joining Mark, I think we have to recognize that it was a huge improvement, right, from the previous one to the current one. And I think this is something that we need to see also, keeping this kind of level of documents. I think even comparing it with jurisdictions, I think it's nowadays we have one of the good NRAs. Yet again, we highlighted a number of issues. We mentioned pool accounts, how they come to that figure. We mentioned products, services. So I think we need to be a bit more agile. I know it's a challenge for everyone. It's not just because there's a huge load of work, I believe, to comparing all that data. So that is where one point where we need to understand. And yet again, Mark mentioned that potentially 3 years, it could be already a bit, so this is something that agility, where it needs to come into place. And also maybe it's just a thought that when there are certain risks which they are being seen, the evolving risks I'm referring to, which even NRA mentioned.
It mentions the emerging risks and how you need to be able to identify them.
So then it could be, rather than waiting for the upcoming NRA, we could have specific documents highlighting that emerging risk. That rather than having 2 years for the next one, 12 months, rather than say, okay, in betweens, maybe those specifics that say, okay, this is an emerging risk. We're seeing this from the STRs reported from foreign, maybe RFIs, that the jurisdiction is receiving, that you should be aware of. And I think it again, it's a good document. Let's keep this kind of document. And at the end of the day, us being MLROs, we need such documents to be able to refer to and to understand not just our institutions, but also external factors which at times we may not be privy to during our task, which then may be reflected in the controls.
And this removes as well myths and might sometimes, because the NRA is showing the situation using data. We're not just...
Yes, it's empirical, it's not a supposition.
It's backed up by data, so this is very important, not only for us in Malta, but also for whoever is thinking of opening up a relationship in Malta, because the NRA is also important, not only for us, but also for external parties looking in Malta.
Thank you. Thank you everyone. Thank you for listening. I think we've gone into quite a bit of detail, so we close this second episode with, I would say, quite a lot of points to take home and to ponder upon. I hope it's helpful. And so I thank Ryan, I thank Mark, and I look forward to now the next episode when we look at another sector.